Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning and good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you to each one of you for taking your time today and joining us. I am Priya Chakravarti. I am delighted to be your host for this session. We truly appreciate your time and interest. We have an exciting session ahead on sovereign AI infrastructure, the unavoidable mandate for GPU Neoclouds. We are joined by some incredible speakers today who will be sharing and their valuable insight with us. Before we start the webinar, let me give you logistic details. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box or use the QA section. We will address them during our QA segment. And else, anyway, we'll come back to you. The session is being recorded and the recording will be shared with you afterward. As I mentioned that we are joined by incredible speakers, let me introduce them to you. Taufik, hi Taufik, hi Amar, welcome. Taufik is
Hi. Hello.
Taufik is a data center veteran who led Intel's CPU's strategic planning during Intel's heyday and was the GM of Intel's Enterprise System Group. Post Intel, he had acted as CEO, co-founder, founder, CPO, CTO, and CSO in different data center companies. He has sold 3 data center technology companies and founded 2 AI data center startups. He is currently managing partner at Aiolian International, where he advises developing nations and their local companies on how to create sovereign AI infrastructure. Our next speaker, Amar Kapadia. Amar is a CEO and co-founder of Partner Networks, previously co-founder of Arohi Communication, and he was part of Mirantis, Seagate, Emulex, HP in the leadership role. I am sure we are going to have an interesting and knowledgeable session from our expert speaker today. Thank you once again. Amar, do you want to take it forward?
Yes. Thanks, Priya.
Yeah.
So we are going to talk about sovereign GPU clouds today, and we're going to structure it as sort of a conversation between me and Taufik, sort of a fireside chat format. So with that, I'm going to ask Taufik several questions, and let me just bring those up. You're still able to see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so Taufik, first let's start off by defining what is sovereign AI infrastructure. So what is it and what's driving this entire trend?
It's a great question. Probably start with the second question first. What's driving the trend? I think there's two things really. The first one is, as I think everybody on the call and who watches this afterwards knows, AI has this incredible promise in terms of transforming, companies and economies and worldwide GDP. In fact, if you listen to Price Waterhouse, they probably have the higher estimate in terms of predicting that by 2030, AI will enable worldwide GDP to grow by 14%, which is huge. So that's factor number one, the promise of AI. Factor number two is, without getting into political discussion, it's pretty obvious that the world is going through this transformation, going through a transformation from interdependency to one of independence and one of more autonomy. Like I said, without getting into politics. So if you put the two of those together, one is giving the incredible importance of AI to countries worldwide, and number two, the need for greater and greater autonomy. It leads countries to think about AI infrastructure differently. And actually, as a quick segue, let me just define what I mean by AI infrastructure. Of course, it requires the underlying GPU clouds, all of the hardware infrastructure and some of the data infrastructure that AI runs on. And then there's the LLM layer, right? Large language model layers. And then on top of that sits the applications that take advantage of all the AI services. So you can consider the GPU clouds and the LLM as infrastructure in this context. So back to what I was saying, countries, given the two macro trends that I mentioned earlier, they look at AI infrastructure differently than they have looked at cloud infrastructure in the past. They look at it more as a national infrastructure, no different than electrical infrastructure for a nation, which is critical to any nation's development, any nation's economy. So if you think about AI infrastructure, no different than electrical or even highway transportation infrastructure for a country, the ability to have that infrastructure be locally owned and operated is a requirement for the country in the name of national security. So I guess just in summary, sovereign AI infrastructure, sovereign GPU clouds are really defined as infrastructure that's locally owned and operated in the name of national security, given the macro trends and how important nations perceive AI will be. Now, we'll talk a little bit later, hopefully, if we have time, about the dependency on the chips, AI chips, because there's a whole bunch of trends that's happening there. But at the infrastructure layer, the assumption for sovereignty is that these AI clouds are locally owned and operated.
Okay, that's great. Now, you did hint at this a little bit, but we've had clouds for over 15 years. So cloud computing has been around, but we have never heard about sovereign clouds to the degree that we are hearing about GPU clouds today in the previous era, which was CPU clouds. So what's different? What has changed that's driving so much attention towards sovereign clouds?
I think if maybe go to the next slide, it'll help explain. I think when I first started, becoming aware of AI sovereignty, I had the same misperception that a lot of people do when they hear the word sovereignty. The initial use of the word sovereignty had really more to do with data sovereignty, which originated with the GDPR and the EU. And for the most part, over the last 10 years, international hyperscalers have adapted their cloud offerings to meet these local data localization requirements. So if you look at this slide in the horizontal axis, the blue box would include any international, like an Azure or a Google or a AWS that's created a sovereign cloud for that region, whether it's EU or the Middle East or Southeast Asia. But that doesn't meet the strict requirements for AI sovereignty, as we're calling it here, on two dimensions. The first one is, even if you stay on data sovereignty, there are extraterritorial regulations. For example, the US Cloud Act that gives them the right to access data, even though it's in another region, if it's in a company that's headquartered in the US. That's referred to as the US Cloud Act. Ostensibly, that's for crime prevention, terrorism prevention, all of that. But it does give countries like the US extraterritorial reach, even though the data center adheres to data localization requirements in that region. So that's one dimension. The other dimension, as I referred to earlier, when countries think about AI as an infrastructure, they need that complete sovereignty. So even if a hyperscaler has a subsidiary, for example, in Southeast Asia, a fully localized subsidiary, it's still headquartered in the US. And because of that, it's subject to trade wars, sanctions, and other creative mechanisms that you can only imagine that, whether it's the US or another major power, could exercise control over in the coming years. The current tariff wars have been focused on physical goods. That's not to say they're going to be extended into services in the future. So if you put all of that together, the green rectangle really represents the trend, given macro factors that I described earlier. And hopefully this one graph helps dispel some of the confusion around the original data sovereignty versus what's now being referred to as AI sovereignty.
Okay, I think this is an amazing diagram. It really clarifies the whole point. Is there a country that you can think of that has taken the lead on defining what a sovereign cloud means?
I think the best example is France. Even though France is a developed nation, it still, because of the macro factors I described earlier, still took the extreme lengths to define what it calls their cloud de confiance, which is basically a certification of private, clouds within France, not government operated. Although the government does put this framework around these clouds, so the government certifies, has come up with a certification for French clouds that requires at minimum 60% local ownership in terms of defining sovereignty. So you can't have more than 39% foreign ownership of that company. So examples of companies that have met the need for this cloud de confiance certification, OVH is one. Blue is another one. It's a collaboration between Capgemini and Orange. So France is the best example. They have defined this certification that requires local companies to have majority local ownership in order to do business in France. And more importantly, any government use of AI has to be from a company that has this cloud de confiance certification. So France is the best lead example.
So you also made a good point that sovereign cloud doesn't necessarily mean government ownership. It could be certified, but owned by local companies as well.
By and large, I think that's the general trend. I think what you might have heard is, there've always been national labs, right? HPC goes back 20, 30 years. And a lot of countries have had HPC labs built and owned and operated by national laboratories and whatnot. And in the era of AI, they've said, oh, these are AI infrastructure now. But that's not, in general, what we're referring to when we talk to AI sovereignty. It's really the birth of commercial AI infrastructure that's locally owned and operated, not operated by the government itself.
So France is a great example, but are you seeing this as a global trend? Are there other countries following in the footsteps?
Absolutely. There are many examples, but I think the ones which people have seen a lot of recently after Trump's visit to the Middle East, one is Abu Dhabi's G42, which is a huge investment in creating a sovereign AI infrastructure. Another example, which is just announced during Trump's visit to Saudi, was the Humana AI cloud. So those are two other examples of big investments into sovereign AI infrastructure.
So maybe let's switch gears a little bit. If there's a government thinking about how to create a sovereign cloud ecosystem, how should they be thinking about this?
I think it comes back to the macro trend number one, which is the economic promise of AI. So for the most part, developing nations, maybe with the exception of some of the larger countries, they know they can't compete with the scale that the US or even the Middle East is putting into AI infrastructure. Everybody's in this massive chase for AGI, artificial general intelligence. And most countries know that to try to compete head to head with lead nations on that is foolish. So they do need infrastructure to train models, either create models from scratch or fine tune existing open source models. But for the most part, they've been focused on inference and being the first or the lead in terms of creating applications that matter, applications that actually deliver economic value to the country. So the focus has really been more on creating AI infrastructure that's multi-tenant friendly and secure, because that's really more the focus when you get into accelerating the development of applications and economic value. It's really inference. and the focus on training is really more isolated. That's one, whereas inference and applications is hundreds and not thousands of projects.
Okay.
In terms of, sorry, I guess I didn't really answer your question. This slide actually talks about what the governments are doing to create their sovereign ecosystems. Try to keep this one short, but basically this gets into some of the work that my firm has been doing in helping governments with creating their policies. There are really two halves of this. On one half, you have what I call the front end motivation for sovereign companies within the sovereign ecosystem. And then on the other side, it's the back end market, the pull. So the push on the front end is, you have to be certified with local owned and operated. And, we'll also provide some funding to help with all the capital costs. And then on the pull side, it's really the guarantee of a market of clients, government clients, which is easy for the government to do. So they can mandate that over time, the different government agencies are required to use locally owned and operated sovereign infrastructure. So in terms of government policy, Amar, that's to answer your question, that's really what governments are doing to sort of nurture the creation of this sovereign ecosystem. I think, as I mentioned earlier, more topically, in the Middle East, you can see that both the Saudi and UAE governments have been plowing billions of dollars to help their sovereign AI companies get off the ground.
So let's explore the pull side a little bit more. I understand the mandate part. So the government can mandate that other government agencies, etc., must use a sovereign cloud. But if everybody else in the country or the region gravitates to the hyperscalers, then the mandate is not enough for the sovereign cloud to survive and sustain itself. So who do you think will be using these sovereign cloud infrastructure deployments, and why will they sort of find it attractive other than the mandate piece?
Well, it sort of goes without saying that you can't force a government. So if you're sitting in a government agency and the government says, "Oh, you have to use a locally operated, sovereign cloud," and you're a techie and you look at the offering and it sucks, right, compared to a hyperscaler service, that doesn't work. So what goes hand in hand with the government's policy is making sure that the sovereign companies are reasonably competitive. They don't have to be at par or even ahead of international hyperscalers, but have to be reasonably competitive enough for government agencies to like to use them. So capability is not just sovereignty, but capability, and as we'll talk about, security are key requirements.
Yeah, we are also seeing that a catalog of PaaS frameworks, MLOps frameworks, LLMs that are tuned for the geography, maybe in terms of language, in terms of the culture. I think that's also a way sovereign clouds can really create appeal for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. LLMs, maybe we skipped over that part, but LLMs obviously have to be tuned for the cultural requirements because every country has different values, different regulations and laws and norms. So that's critical. But yeah, this slide is probably a little simplistic too, as Amar has pointed out. It also includes the requirement for a bunch of other AI services, all the the RAG database, the other AI platform as a service offerings that surround the core LLM. Those are critical in terms of having a comprehensive solution that's competitive with non-sovereign clouds.
Okay, excellent. I think this has been a great discussion. Maybe we'll segue to a little bit on what your company does and how you help on the sovereign cloud side, and then we will quickly cover what Arna does in this space. So
Okay.
let me just, I know you have I think there's another slide here. Do you want
That's
to?
all right. In the spirit of time, we can skip this.
Okay. All right. So yeah, why don't you cover what Aiolian does?
So Aiolian is really we're a boutique consulting firm, really focused on this whole trend as we've been talking about relative to sovereign AI. So our consulting, the way we can help is across the three things that you see in this picture here: the strategic planning. Myself and other partners of the firm are incredibly technical with our backgrounds, but then also be able to help companies and countries with creating their policies. So, for example, right now I'm helping the Malaysian government with definition of their AI policy. And then, last but not least, the U.S. regulations, especially around AI chip exports, is very fluid, and that's something we keep very close tabs on, and that's also something that we can help companies with and consult with.
So actually, that's a great point. This discussion cannot be complete without at least some narrative on the US GPU export control. Now, this is so dynamic that somebody watching this recording next week or next month may find it completely out of date. But nevertheless, as of May 28th, what is the state of GPU export control and how does it impact people thinking about sovereign clouds?
It can be a long answer or a short answer. The short answer is there was a Biden regulation that Trump rescinded 3 weeks ago, and his administration, the Bureau of Industry and Security, is due to replace it with the updated regulation. Nobody knows for sure exactly when it will arrive, but it's supposed to be both stronger and simpler.
Okay.
A lot of speculation on what that means. So that's one. The other one is with the Trump administration and Trump himself, everything is transactional. So if you have enough money, you can preempt being subject to this new regulation, whatever and it comes out, whatever it looks like. So the assumption right now is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE, for the most part, are now exempt from, regardless of what the new regulation is, given that they've just announced these huge deals, including a lot of AI investments, both ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both the US and into the region. So that's the short answer. There's a longer answer, but that's probably a different webinar.
Okay, awesome. So I'll quickly cover what Arna does, and we can wrap up with questions after that. So how does Arna.ml help with sovereign cloud GPU cloud providers? So we covered this point that a sovereign cloud has to be competitive in its functionality. It cannot be subpar. If it is subpar, the mandates ultimately will fail. So that's exactly what we see in the market, that sovereign cloud providers want hyperscaler grade on-demand capabilities, PaaS functionality, so that their customers find it at par with hyperscalers at some level, and then better than hyperscalers in terms of a local ecosystem of PaaS providers, MLOps providers, locally tuned LLMs, etc. So that's the high-level market need we see, and without this, the sovereign cloud runs the danger of being subpar, in which case nobody will really use it ultimately. So we have a product. Arna is a software company, and we have a product called GPU Cloud Management Software, and this product solves the problem that I just outlined. So very quickly, it's in two parts. The lower level of the software is called infrastructure management. It's essentially maps to IaaS. So for our customers that are GPU as a service providers, NVIDIA cloud partners, Neoclouds, sovereign cloud providers, essentially they can take this layer and offer IaaS functionality such as bare metal as a service, virtual machines as a service, Kubernetes clusters with GPUs with full isolation. So we do deep isolation across 7 pillars, which I'll quickly talk about. And then the above layer is essentially the platform services layer, which maps to PaaS, platform as a service for our customers. And that deals with creation of instances, bare metal, VMs, Kubernetes, and also serverless modalities such as job submission, model serving, etc. So we offer that software. It works with a centralized GPU cloud, and it also works with edge. So in the NVIDIA vision, the edge is something called AI and RAN, where you can have AI traffic and 5G traffic both running at the edge. So we support that use case as well. This is what our software looks like. So at the bottom, you have all the hardware. You have the NVIDIA HGX servers, MGX servers. You have the networking fabric, such as SpectrumX, InfiniBand fabric, potentially, and as an optional item, such as quantum switches. You can have storage from vendors such as VAST, DDN, and Weka. And you can have WAN gateways from vendors such as F5. So that's the hardware layer. Above that, you have the hardware provisioning layer, such as NVIDIA Base Command Manager or Redfish. And then our product is above that. So we have the Infra Manager, which consists of an admin console, where the admin can onboard the entire topology, create tenants, create flavors, observability, fault management, etc. And above that, the tenant or the end user, we call that a tenant. The tenant can create instances, bare metal virtual machines and containers. And the platform manager is the user interface layer where you can create these GPU instances or submit jobs for execution or model as a service. So you can point to a Hugging Face model or to an NVIDIA NIM model and spin it up as a private or a public endpoint. What's really fascinating is that the infrastructure management underneath is done automatically. So in the case of instance creation or deletion, it's pretty self-evident. But in the case of model serving and job submission, the infrastructure is created automatically, scaled automatically, and terminated automatically. We also support a catalog of third-party apps such as Slurm, RunAI, etc. We have billing integration. We have billing integration with a cloud billing software company called Monetize 360, also with Stripe, user management, and role-based access control. And one very important point to make is that the isolation we do on multi-tenancy is something we call hard isolation, as opposed to soft isolation. So the hard isolation uses techniques such as VXLAN for Ethernet, P-key for InfiniBand, bare metal or KVM for CPU, bare metal or MIG, multi-instance GPUs for GPU, VRFs, and storage provider APIs for storage isolation. And the two others that are not mentioned here are VPC through the WAN gateway and NVLink multi-tenancy. So we view multi-tenancy as 7 pillars. And this is very important because you could potentially have 2 competing sovereign customers on the same sovereign cloud. And they have to feel comfortable that their instances are completely secure. We have 2 use cases. One is a sovereign cloud use case, which we discussed at length. So as a sovereign cloud provider, you can purchase GPUs and all the associated hardware, and then our GPU CMS layer on top. And through that, you can start exposing bare metal VM, CAS, which is Kubernetes, GPU instances to your tenants. They can do job submission, model serving. You can expose the capacity to your own portal, to a marketplace such as DGX Lepton Cloud, or you can do both. So you can expose that capacity in different ways. So this is pretty straightforward. Essentially, if you're a sovereign cloud provider and you want hyperscaler capabilities, we are the place to come. We also have another use case. What if you're a country that's not big enough to set up a 512 or 1,000 GPU cluster. You don't have massive data centers. So then what do? Can you not do sovereign cloud? No, you can still do sovereign clouds. And the way you do it is we have a SaaS product. Essentially, it's our same product, but a SaaS version. And we white label it with your logo. And then you work with trusted GPU as a service wholesale providers that may be in your region, maybe outside your region, but you can create relationships with these. You can have contracts, SLAs, strict oversight and governance with these third-party GPU as a service wholesale providers. And you can have one or more, and then their capacity shows up on your portal. And so these are all trusted. Now, these instances are trusted. You have strict controls over them. You have all the capabilities of our software, on-demand instances, reserved instances, the whole PaaS catalog. And now you are in control of the users. You can do KYC, know your customer on your users. You can manage policies on what your customers can do, what they cannot do. And manage the entire PaaS experience. So even if you're a small country, you can still roll out a sovereign cloud, I guess is the point of this slide. So why Arna? Very quickly, comprehensive, fully isolated multi-tenancy, which I talked about, consistent architecture, edge to cloud. We have admin observability and fault management for OpEx reduction. Marketplace integration, which we talked about. We can customize the GUI. Again, we talked about this to a certain degree. And flexible models, pricing models. Finally, we are also an NVIDIA-funded company. NVIDIA is invested in us in our previous round. So with that, I would like to conclude today's webinar. Thank you so much for attending. And Priya, if there are any questions, we can address them at this point.
Yeah, I think due to the time constraint also we need to close the webinar, but I am seeing one question. What needs to be done to automate AI workload governance and export control compliance?
So maybe Taufik, you could take that.
Yeah, I think I can take that. So this relates to the US AI chip export regulations. The prior Biden regulation, which may show up in the new Trump one, as I mentioned earlier, did require that they keep track of how many AI chips are in the data center in a foreign country. I mean, the macro factors there, the US is concerned about chips finding their way into China, who's their big AI competition. So, they would like for, sovereign clouds to keep physical track of their inventory to make sure that what they've said they bought is actually installed in the data center. And number two, they'd like to keep track of who's actually using that AI infrastructure. So it's not a Chinese company that's training foundation models using US GPUs that happen to be installed in a different country. So as opposed to trying to do that manually to address US concerns as the regulations evolve, the ideal scenario is to automate both of those, automate the inventory and automate the KYC and the workload tracking of the respective clients, so that when the US wants assurance that you're treating their GPUs with their concerns in mind, it's easy information to provide to the US officials. And that's something that can be automated, and ANA is something that's on their roadmap.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. How is end-to-end multi-tenant isolation achieved across networking, storage, and GPU scheduling?
Yeah, that's a very important point. We covered that in terms of hard isolation, where we use techniques such as VXLAN, InfiniBand peak key, KVM, VRFs for storage, etc. And happy to go into it in more detail. We have a reference architecture document as well. So if anybody wants to learn more about how we do this hard isolation, please send me an email. So with that, I'll share
the email.
my and Taufik's email addresses. So if you would like to follow up with Taufik on the services provided by Aiolian, then follow up with him. If you would like to discuss anything that we presented, including the hard multi-tenancy, and get access to the reference architecture document, just send me a quick email.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thank you, Amar. Thank you, Taufik. I think due to the time constraint, we need to close our webinar. Please write to us. We will definitely take the conversation forward, and we truly appreciate the time you take to attend our webinar, where we intend to share only the knowledge. See you all soon. Good day and good night. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.